morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to today's ISO Balancing Area Extended Day-Ahead Market Access Charge Tariff Review meeting. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Today's slide deck presentation is available on the initiative webpage, and you can get to that page by going to kiso.com, and then under the Stakeholder Center tab on the home page, you'll see policy initiatives. If you click that link, it'll take you out to our main initiative landing page where you can search for the initiative webpage. This meeting is being recorded and the video file will be posted to the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And if you need any technical assistance at any point during the meeting today, please send a chat to Inteller Events, the host. To ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right, and you can then raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon. Or if you joined audio only, you can press *3 on your device. And for everyone joining us today, please state your name and affiliation first before speaking. And you may also send comments and questions via chat to all participants or to me directly. Today's agenda will include an extended day-ahead market access charge presentation by Milos and James, followed by draft tariff ISO extended day-ahead market access charge tariff language overview by Heather. And after that, we'll wrap up with next steps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Milos.
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the EDAM access charge and the application of that charge to the ISO balancing area. Before we jump into the tariff language, we wanted to do a bit of a primer to set the context and kind of remind folks on the EDAM access charge. It's been a while that topic has been discussed, and now we're talking about it in the context of the ISO balancing area rules, and frankly, I think I needed as well to remind myself, and the presentation was helpful to kind of to bring our internal folks up to speed, and we thought it may help here as well. But the focus of today's discussion is on the application of the EDAM access charge to the ISO balancing area, and particularly how certain aspects will be sub-allocated within the ISO balancing area. I'm going to start with a bit of a recap on the EDAM access charge, and then turn it over briefly to James Lynn, who's going to provide an overview of the allocation of the EDAM access charge within the balancing area. And then we're going to turn over the attention to Heather Curley, who's going to walk through the draft tariff language that's intended to effectively apply the EDAM access charge to the ISO balancing area. So starting with the function and purpose of the EDAM access charge as background, through the design of the EDAM, there was recognition that participation in a wider day-ahead market can impact revenues derived from sales of certain transmission products, and for the ISO, that means that there may be an impact on the wheeling access charge revenues, or the WAC, what we call, for the ISO. The EDAM access charge is intended to support continued transmission revenue recovery associated with certain historical revenue streams. For the ISO, again, that's the wheeling access charge, and for other EDAM entities, it's the revenue stream of short-term sales of transmission products. And in its essence, the EDAM access charge is intended to mitigate or avoid inappropriate cost shifts between transmission customers that may occur to the extent that you were not to recover those transmission revenues that historically you were receiving. For the ISO, at certain tie points becoming intertie transfer points once EDAM entities joins, there may be an impact in a reduction in the wheeling access charge revenues, transmission revenues. And as I noted, today we're going to cover how the ISO will recover those wheeling access charge revenues consistent with both the approved EDAM design tariff language as well as approved prior policy by the ISO board, and what those different allocations within the ISO balancing area may look like. I do want to remind folks that as part of the FERC order approving the EDAM design last year in December of 2023, when they approved the EDAM design, the one lingering element that was not approved was the EDAM access charge, but we subsequently refiled that EDAM access charge tariff, and FERC approved that in June of 2024. So now we have the full breadth of EDAM design has been approved, including the EDAM access charge tariff language that we're looking to now translate certain aspects more granularly of how does it apply to the ISO balancing area. So I'll go now in the next few slides through more background and an overview of the different components of the EDAM design, access charge, and then we're going to pause for questions after we get through a handful of these slides. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, just a bit more background to contextualize why we're here with the draft ISO balancing area tariff. But last year, the ISO undertook an initiative that's called EDAM ISO Balancing Area Participation Rules that's focused on aspects of the ISO balancing area participation in the EDAM. How does the ISO balancing area coordinate with entities, load-serving entities, generators to support the resource sufficiency allocation process, allocation of settlements, and other related aspects to more discrete ISO balancing area participation in the EDAM. In September of last year, as part of that first phase of the effort, the ISO Board of Governors approved a proposal on the EDAM ISO Balancing Area Participation Rules Initiative, which included provisions for the application of the EDAM access charge and allocation of those provisions within the ISO balancing area. We did file those ISO balancing area rules with FERC in late 2023, and in March of this year, March of 24, the FERC approved all of those provisions that were filed that govern the ISO participation rules in EDAM, except the EDAM access charge, which was seen as moot at that point, since FERC had not yet approved the broader EDAM access charge tariff at that point. And so we're moving today forward with draft language that will facilitate us refiling that EDAM access charge unique to the ISO balancing area. Now that FERC has approved this past June, they approved the broader EDAM access charge tariff language. The approved EDAM access charge tariff language that's in section 33.26 of the tariff that's been approved again last June, it sets the expectation that the ISO is going to describe its process and allocation for the ISO balancing area within section 26 of the tariff. And so as you'll see later today, as Heather walks through it, that is the tariff language in section 26 that then will translate the broader EDAM access charge design to the ISO and how we sub-allocate certain aspects of that design within the ISO balancing area. So we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now getting into the overall design of the EDAM access charge, more of as a reminder of what it is. But the EDAM access charge has three components associated with it. It provides for recovery of historical revenues associated with short-term firm, non-firm sales for EDAM entities, and for the ISO, it's historical wheeling access charge revenues that may be recovered at particular EDAM enterprise. A second component of the access charge deals with recovery of revenues associated with new transmission upgrades that increase the transfer capability between EDAM areas, as a recognition that some of those revenues may traditionally be at risk. And then the third component looks at transmission costs associated with what we call net EDAM wheel-through transfers. This is when the EDAM area's transmission system may be utilized more for wheel-through transfers to other EDAM areas than maybe the area benefits from import-export EDAM transfers to other EDAM areas. And we'll talk about each one of these more specifically on the next slide. So we can go to the next slide. So component one, this is in the context of the ISO, this refers to historical wheeling access charge revenues that are associated with the ISO recovery of those wheeling revenues at the EDAM transfer points. When an EDAM entity joins the EDAM, the intertie point becomes a transfer point between the ISO and that EDAM entity, and there may be an impact on wheeling access charge revenues that were historically recovered across that intertie. And this component one allows for the recovery of those historical WAC revenues at that particular intertie to the extent that there is an impact. The historical wheeling access charge revenues that are recoverable are based on looking at a 3-year average of those WAC revenues prior to that EDAM point becoming a transfer point, and that is that historical component number one. There's an annual true-up as well that ensures that, similar to other EDAM entities, the ISO balancing area is kept whole to those historical 3-year average wheeling access charge revenues at the particular EDAM transfer points that are in effect at that point in time. If we can go to the next slide, please. And then we get to component 2, which deals with transmission upgrades that may increase the transfer capability between EDAM areas. And there's a recognition, again, with this concept that there may be an impact on wheeling access charge revenues once you're in EDAM to the extent that new project increases transfer capability between those EDAM areas. There may not be a traditional recovery of wheeling access charge revenues, and that's where component 2 comes in to say that but for the EDAM, there would have been a certain recovery of wheeling access charge revenues that needs to be accounted for here in component 2. And for the ISO, the way that you derive that, similar to other EDAM areas, is you would look at what were the historical 3-year average or WAC revenues that were recovered on that particular EDAM transfer point, and that's compared to the overall ratio of the total transmission revenue requirement within the balancing area. And that derives a ratio that effectively creates a wheeling access charge amount that is recoverable under component 2. If we go to the next slide, please. And then finally, the component 3, which is the net EDAM wheel through transfer transmission cost recovery. And this recognizes, again, that the EDAM balancing area transmission system supports efficient transfers between EDAM areas. And to the extent, in some instances, we've been tracking this in the EIM context, but in some instances, in some periods of the year, a particular EDAM transmission system may be utilized more to support wheel-throughs and benefits to other EDAM areas than necessarily to itself, compared to the import-export transfers from that EDAM area. And to the extent that there are these net EDAM wheel-through transfers across a particular balancing area, the design provides for compensation for that incremental, effectively, use of the transmission system at the particular rate that's applicable at that time, and that would be the wheeling access charge for the ISO. In that instance, to the extent that the ISO balancing area finds itself that its system is supported in a period of time, the net EDAM, net wheel-through transfers above and beyond the export-import transfers for a particular month. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over here to James Lynn on the next slide to walk through the allocations. I walked through the design. Now James is going to talk a bit about the allocations within the ISO balancing area, the proposal that's been approved by the ISO board last September that we're looking to codify now in the tariff. So James, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Milos. And just an FYI for everybody, my name's James Lynn. Let me start my video. I am the principal for market settlement design. So I've been involved in this for a while. So let me give you a little background on what's going to happen here. There's a lot of information on these 4 bullets. I'm going to describe a little bit on details of what's going to happen. So for each DAA that has recoverable revenue, and that includes the ISO, they're going to submit to the ISO market operator, particularly settlements, their various components. You got the historic, which is component 1. You've got the new transmission, which is component 2. You have the excess wheel, which you'll gather from information we provided you from the prior year in our settlement statements, plus any true-ups. This as a total becomes what your EDAM recoverable revenue is. All right. And then what we'll do with that is for each BAA, I'm going to calculate the rate that another BAA's gross load is going to be charged in order to recover this revenue. And so what we'll do is, for example, I'll have BA1 maybe has $100,000, and I have two other BAAs that have joined. So BA2 and BA3 are the BAs we're going to collect from. So each of those BAAs will get a proportion amount of the revenue from this BAA that needs to be recovered. This is going to be based upon pro rata gross load. The same thing is going to occur for BA2 and BA3 in BA1. So for ISO, I'm going to have a rate that is going to be based upon all of the EDAM BAs that have joined, what their recoverable revenue in proportion to our gross load and any other BA's gross load that is going to be covered from. So for BA2, it's pro rata between BA3 and, let's say in this case, ISO is BA1. BA3, it'd be pro rata between BA2 and ISO. Now that becomes a total rate. This gets applied to gross load. So now we've collected this. That's what bullet 2 is. I've calculated a rate, and now I'm collecting it from gross load within EDAM BAs as well as ISO BA. The collection from ISO BAA will then be distributed as revenue to the EDAM BAs. The revenue collected from EDAM BAs associated with the ISO recoverable amount will then be brought to the ISO BA as EDAM recovered revenue. And this is then going to be distributed within our BAA. How we're going to distribute within our BAA is, as the process that Milos described earlier, each PTO is going to give us their portion of what is foregone WAC revenue. And so then whatever their portion in relationship to the total, which we went to collect, becomes the ratio that is applied to what we did collect. Now, that's basically how we get down to bullet 3 and bullet 4. It describes how it's going to be collected and distributed. I'm going to see if there's any, I know there's a lot of information I just gave. Is there any questions?
We have a hand raised by Bert Hansen.
Hello, Bert.
Bert, you should be unmuted now. Let's see.
I can't hear you, Bert, if you're talking.
Bert, it looks like we're not able to. Oh, yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Bert Hansen, Southern California Edison. I'm reading bullet number 3. I'm a little bit confused, especially with respect to the example of the California ISO balancing authority area, where each BAA is distributed to those BAAs, the access charge that set the EDAM access charge rate. In the ISO,
Right,
does
so,
it mean that that is distributed to those PTOs, or how is this getting at an example where there's multiple BAAs in a EDAM BAA? So I'm a little confused there.
Yeah, so, I get that. Okay, let me, and that's why I was kind of afraid I was kind of jumping through it really quickly. All right, let's say the ISO determined at $100,000 of wheeling revenue that is foregone. I'm going to collect it from 2 other EDAM BAAs, and that pro rata distribution was 50-50. So I have supposed to collect 50,000 from BAA2, 50,000 from BAA3. Let's that's from that, I'm going to create a rate for each of those BAAs. And so it's going to say for BA2, this is your rate from ISO revenue that needs to be collected from your gross load. Same with BAA3. And now when we get actual gross load, we'll apply that rate. This is how we're going to wind up with the need for a true-up, because the estimate of the rate is based on prior year's gross load, whereas what we're going to collect is going to be based on current year's gross load. So now I applied that to BA2 and BA3. I collected 55,000 in BA2, and I collect 40,000 in BA3. Okay. Now, from an ISO perspective, that 95,000 is going to get summed up together because it's from our foregone revenue, and that 95,000 is then going to be distributed to the PTOs as described in bullet 4. Now, the same thing is going to occur in the ISO BAA when it comes to collecting revenue for the other EDAM BAAs. ISO BAA gross load will have a rate that is associated with recoverable revenue from BA2 and a rate for recoverable revenue from BA3. We'll collect it from our gross load, and then we will put it as a dollar value in BA2 and BA3 to be distributed to their transmission service provider. Did that help?
I think so. So going back to bullet 3, the phrase is distributed to, is that more like is assessed to?
Distributed to meaning I've collected it, and now I have to bring it back to the BAAs for them to for us to sub-allocate. So that's that description where I say ISO would create a rate for BA2 and BA3. I've now collected it, and now in BA2 and BA3, I'm going to collect a portion for ISO and a portion for the other BA. That total then says, all right, this is how I'm going to get their total down to 55,000 goes to ISO, and then let's say for BA2 another 35,000 goes to BA3. Same thing with BA3. What we collected from the gross load needs to be distributed into how much goes to the ISO BAA and how much goes to BA2, so that we can each do our own sub-allocation of that revenue.
Okay, I think I understand.
Okay. I know I tried trying to get this in a bullet was rather hard. So sorry, I apologize for that. Any other questions?
Not seeing any other hands raised. Did you have any final thoughts before we move on?
I do not. I was actually going to hand it over to Heather after this.
Perfect. So next we'll be hearing from Heather Curley regarding the draft ISO exam access charge tariff language. Please bear with us while we switch over to that document. Heather, you're muted right now.
Excellent. I'm glad I turned on my video then so you all could see that. Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know, I'm Heather Curley. I'm senior counsel here at the CAISO, and I've been helping this excellent team that's been presenting to you here navigate how to implement the EDAM framework for the ISO balancing authority area. So a lot of us worked closely together as we developed the 3 components of our day 1 participation. But as Milo said, this one piece was declared moot, and so we're tackling it now. Our plan here is to go over the tariff language with you all in a group. There are a few changes that have been made thanks to some helpful friends who phoned with a few mostly minor edits. So the version I'm going to share on screen has some red lines from that's posted to reflect those. So just a heads up that you'll see a bit of a redlining. Please use the raise hand feature We have a really great operator here who can help manage all of our questions. If for some reason you aren't able to use the raise hand, use the chat. Feel free to also email any of us if you need to get your issues or questions in. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share our tariff version. And as that comes on screen, I guess I just can't, I just have to spend a moment to acknowledge my alma mater. Go Vandy, great win over Bama this weekend. So proving just anything can happen. So, and we can complete this EDAM access charge. Okay, I'm going to start here at the beginning, and this is probably where you're going to see the most red lines. I think there was a little bit of confusion to what we were doing here. And so I just want to go over it and go over some terminology as we get started. So you just heard Milos and James give a really great presentation on the EDAM framework and the EDAM access charge. So CAISO will get a bill, and the bill will say EDAM access charge, and there will be a dollar amount. Other entities, we call them the EDAM Entity Balancing Authority areas. They get a bill for the EDAM access charge, and part of their bill is made up of the EDAM recoverable revenue attributable to the CAISO Balancing Authority area. So this first section just really tries to set the table, both for FERC staff as well as for others who are looking at this as a model for implementing their own tariffs in their own areas. So we do have some level setting here. On another screen that I may be flipping between, I also have our approved framework language in section 3326. And you'll see there are lots of liberal references. Again, we're not intending to rewrite or change. We're trying to, make 26 standing on its own, a clear as possible and understandable version of what's happening here. So let's get into it. The main thing we're doing here is describing how the EDAM recoverable revenue, I'm going to say, attributable to the CAISO Balancing Authority area, and it's going to be calculated as we're going to describe below. Oh, sorry, I had already put the change in. And so for the EDAM access charge attributable to the CAISO Balancing Authority area, we're going to go into some detail below. We added a clarification that each EDAM entity is only going to be getting a portion of the CAISO's charge. It could have been read before to say that only the CAISO's charges would go in that EDAM access bucket, and that's not right. So we tried to add some words in here. We hope we got it right, but we're happy to take some comments either now or offline. But as we get into it, so here's CAISO participating in the EDAM. So CAISO is going to act as a market operator, and it's going to derive an EDAM access charge for others, and that EDAM access charge will include, in part, the EDAM recoverable revenue associated with the CAISO Balancing Authority area. We say how to calculate that below. Now, when CAISO acting as market operator is going to derive the EDAM access charge allocated to the CAISO, then we'll include the EDAM recoverable revenue associated with everybody else. How this revenue associated with everybody else is calculated is not what we're talking about here. Everything here for the calculations of the framework are going to be found in section 3326. We have a copy of this posted on our EDAM initiative page under FERC approved tariff language. And so what we're going to get into in the details here is what this means for the CAISO. While other people may find, I think, helpful models in what we're doing here, our goal was to really stay within the four corners of that framework. So for the calculations, actually, I'm sorry, I'll pause. Are there any questions? And Christina or the operator, I'm not able to see them. So let me know if there are any questions at this juncture.
Not currently seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Okay, Great. Christina, will you just interrupt me if you do see someone's hand?
Of course.
Okay. So we're going to calculate the EDAM recoverable revenue associated with the CAISO balancing. I realize I'm kind of switching between associated and attributed. I will clean that up before our next round of edits are posted. I'm not intending to mean anything different here. I think we're just trying to get a clean tariff drafted that is not confusing. So don't read anything more into that, but we will get that language cleaned up. So how are we going to do that? Well, each PTO is going to, if they choose, do a filing to make sure they can get their associated EDAM recoverable revenue requirement. The associated EDAM recoverable revenue requirement for each PTO is going to be made up of the three components set forth below. Now, this language here is drafted recognizing that each PTO maintains control over its own rates. The CAISO intends to be a collaborating partner in all of this. We are planning to sync the EDAM recoverable revenue requirement with the transmission revenue balancing account processes that are further detailed in the VPM. Through these processes, we will detail the collaboration and information sharing so that each PTO may obtain the data it's going to need to complete its calculations that we'll get into. But since those are all process and implementation details, we haven't included them here, but the CAISO team is available to talk about those with you either now or later. But I think a lot of that is still to be developed. We are, I say, as much as we can, trying to sync it with our existing processes to minimize administrative burden for our PTOs. And we are here to provide support as folks get into necessary FERC filings and how we can support those and help get those over the line to the extent that we can be useful. So if for each PTO that wishes to move forward to recover this money, the EDAM recoverable revenue requirement, it's gonna be made of three component parts. Again, some helpful friends here. These edits are intended to be clarifying and not substantive, but again, we're setting the table both for FERC staff, for future employees of CAISO, for other EDAM entity balancing authorities. So we wanted to have Section 26 here be self-contained so that we're leading in with the general and then providing more specifics below. The draft had missed some nuances, and that wasn't we weren't trying to do that. I wasn't trying to do that. So I've tried to fix it. If I've missed some nuances, let me know. I'm happy to get the right words in. But I think if you read Section 3326.211, you're going to find that it explains that each PTO may include a portion of its historical WAC revenue that's foregone at only those scheduling points that correspond with the EDAM internal intertie. Now, that is not data that the PTOs have today. And so, as I mentioned earlier on our collaboration process that will be set forth in a future VPM revision, you're going to have a lot of help from the CAISO on that. So, but again, we have drafted our tariff recognizing that each PTO is in charge of its own rate. And so if the PTO will be moving forward to recover this money, component one will be calculated, each PTO will calculate component one based on the portion of historical annual average wheeling access charge revenue it reasonably expects to forego for the 3 years leading up to its EDAM participation at each scheduling point that corresponds with an EDAM internal intertie. And if I flip over here to Section 3326 and I bring us to component one, I'm not going to go through this all here, but you will see this is what this says. Right now, 3326 was written and drafted largely for those who are operating under OAT transmission service. And again, the purpose of our initiative is to shore that up and set forth the details of what that means within the CAISO balancing authority area. And when the CAISO balancing authority area, that means a portion of your foregone wheeling access charge at each scheduling point. And so this will only be those scheduling point that corresponds with the EDAM internal intertie. Again, as folks get onboarded at different times, new scheduling points will be created. But the scheduling point, if you trace it back to Appendix A, is created, when an entity joins. And then once that scheduling point has been created, this projected revenue has been calculated. As the next sentence provides, that projection and that calculation for those scheduling points are fixed. New scheduling points will come as others join. And so this is intended to be, again, kind of a cyclical process as scheduling points come into play, but it only happens once for the scheduling point and associated with the entity joining. So we're not getting a duplicative. James can talk through more details of that.
Heather, just
Sure.
if you have a moment, we have a hand raised by Bonnie Blair.
Sure, go ahead and let's unmute Bonnie. And Bonnie, hopefully it's unmuted and you can begin speaking whenever.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. So this is Bonnie Blair. I work with the Six Cities group. I am wrestling with the reasonably expects to forego language. Is it, I would assume that if a scheduling point that was historically a scheduling point between BAAs becomes internal to EDAM, that all of the WAC revenues at that scheduling point would go away. But is that correct? Or will there continue to be WAC revenues at what has become an internal EDAM scheduling point? Is my question clear? Are you following my question?
Well, I think your question has two parts. I think one, your question was on the tariff language of reasonably expects to forego. And so I wanted to point out that that's in our framework language. And so again, to keep things consistent and not create overlapping requirements, you'll see that I used the same language in our ISO that was used and accepted by FERC in the frameworks. So again, that everyone is equal. Now, so just to kind of provide that background and genesis of where that language came from. Now, Bonnie, your question, I'm actually going to call on James. I know James was having some WebEx issues, so hopefully he's back on and can answer. But James, once we have converted to a scheduling point, I think Bonnie was asking, is there any more WAC revenue at the place that is now an EDAM internal intertie?
So first, can you hear me, Heather?
I can.
Okay. So this language is specifically designed for when a scheduling point, which is associated with multiple BAAs, only has one of those BAAs joining EDAM. That means, for a good example of it is Malin. Malin is a scheduling point with BPA, the scheduling point with Portland General. I think PowerX has one right there, and then PacifiCorp has rights there. When PacifiCorp joins, only their portion is going to be turned into an internal EDAM intertie. So I can't take all of the WAC revenue at Malin and say that now needs to be recovered. I need to figure out.
Okay, I follow you. So great. So the answer to my question is it's only in many cases anyway, it's likely only to be a portion of the historical WAC revenues. Now, so the next question is, and I truly don't know the answer to this, is there historical information that says, or is there information available that says 3 years ago, the WAC revenues from scheduling point X that were paid by NV Energy, say, were this many dollars? In other words, is the breakdown of historical revenues at a particular scheduling point by paying entity information that folks have?
Well, so Bonnie, I think
So-
you're hitting on where, hold on, James, let me take it first, but then I'll turn it back to you probably. I think you're hitting on where we're all going to need collaboration, and we probably will set forth more in the BPM. But on this, you know, we did not have a system built tracking exactly this in some sort of, you know, easily codable way. So it's not as if everyone already has access to this data. The CAISO is going to be able to prepare and again, work with and discuss those numbers with the PTOs to arrive at the amount the PTO reasonably expects to forego. But that's really going to be part of our collaboration process. As I think, James, now you fill in all the details.
Well, I'm not going to go into all the details, but the answer, Bonnie, is yes, because you may not see it now, but we do use the intertie tagging system is what we're looking to potentially identify this, because you'll be able to see where that energy was tagged from and going to. And so if it's going through Malin and then going onto another BAA, it tells you what the TSP is. And we're going to be using that information to help determine what percentage is going to be, and it's going to be percentage, what percentage is going to be converted into transfer location, and then we'll apply that to the wheeling access charge at that transfer location or at that scheduling point.
So
we have some more details. Yeah, go ahead, Bonnie.
I was just going to say, so I think I'm following you. So essentially, that's not information that PTOs necessarily have now. In other words, if they go back and look at what were my wheeling revenues from point X for 2022, they won't be able to see that it was, you know, X% from BPA and X% from NV Energy and X% from whomever, but that you guys are going to, if I understood what you just said, you're going to go back and look at actual schedules across the scheduling points and try to come up with that information.
Yes, we are going to come up with that information and then work in conjunction with the PTOs to indicate the impact and indicate what portion is attributed to your PTO.
Okay. All right. I follow you. That sounds like a reasonable approach. So it's a matter of you guys helping to assemble information that at least currently wouldn't be available to the individual PTOs.
Correct.
Right. At least not easily. You know, I'm sure with some work, someone could dig down and try to estimate these numbers for themselves. But right, Bonnie, I think this is going to require substantial collaboration with the ISO, and that in part supports, I think, our use of that same language from the framework document about reasonably expects to forego.
And then
so
Heather,
Bonnie,
we have another question from Bert after Bonnie.
Yeah,
okay, Bonnie.
I think I'm done for now. I think I understood what you said. Thank you.
Okay, Bert, take the mic now. Hopefully it'll be unmuted by the time you're ready, and we'll pick up from there.
Hello, this is Bert Hanson, Southern California Edison. Can you hear me?
Confirmed.
Okay, so I'm not sure where this question fits into, but it has to do with the EDAM recoverable revenue that's distributed among the ISO PTOs.
So hold on, hold on, Bert, just so I understand. You're talking about and I'm just going to use names because it might be easier. So the CAISO's market operator has created an EDAM access charge. We've issued that EDAM access charge to, let's say, Portland General. Portland General pays its bill. Is your question about how the money gets from the CAISO to the PTOs?
Not just how, but when it happens. I mean, I understand that it will be distributed among the PTOs in some fashion, perhaps by scheduling point. So
actually not by scheduling point. That's I think the key. So let's see. It is right. I just got to find it real fast. Sorry. We just hadn't got to it. Here we go. So here's how it'll happen. Let's say I use Portland General in my example, but let's use Portland General and LADWP here for my example. So we have two extras or two entities. So both they've received their bill from CAISO that had an EDAM access charge. Both Portland General and LADWP have paid their bills. And now the CAISO must distribute that money to the PTOs. It's not going to do that based on scheduling point. It's going to do that based on your individual portion of your EDAM recoverable revenue requirement in relation to the EDAM recoverable revenue requirements for all PTOs in the CAISO BA. And so, then you will true it up next year if necessary. But it's not a dollar for dollar match. Was that your question?
Not entirely. That's okay. Interesting. But my question is, given that we will be receiving as a PTO additional revenues, and we will be including that in our revenue requirement, and we are currently anticipating that we will, similarly to current wheeling revenues, include that in our TRBA. So it would be reducing our revenue requirement, transmission revenue requirement, which is by definition the sum of our formula rate based transmission revenue requirement minus, you could say, or plus a negative from the TRBAA. And so that benefits, when you look at the way the transmission access charge of the ISO works, that benefits everybody that's a transmission customer within the ISO and also wheeling entities. And so I'm wondering if there is a requirement that all PTOs that receive EDAM recoverable revenue to their PTO, are they required to basically reduce their revenue requirement? Or I thought I saw something earlier that sort of waffled and made it sound like it's sort of an option.
So, okay, so I think you might be mixing a couple concepts. It's an option about whether the PTO seeks this to move the money from the bucket of WAC revenue to the bucket of EDAM recoverable revenue. In some cases, this money may be de minimis. We may be talking about hundreds or even thousands of dollars, and this could be a lot of work to move $100 from one bucket to another bucket. So not every PTO has to do this, but for the PTOs that choose to do this, we are envisioning, though we don't dictate how folks do their rates, that this is within your transmission revenue requirement. Now, transmission revenue requirement is large, and how each PTO does that varies across company. We're not intending to specify how, though I think as we talked with folks, within your TRRBA seems like the right place to do it. And so there might be other places to do it, but we don't want to create a situation where money's moving from one bucket, coming in from another, and there's no reconciliation of those. That could lead to over recovery, which would be inconsistent with FERC's rules. So we don't dictate how folks are going to do it, but it is within, so you're not getting an over recovery. Okay, and then for your other question, and then you asked about, that was the May, and I covered the May file. You don't have to, nobody has to try to move their money into this bucket. The risk of, if you don't do the filings, is that you could be subject to a FERC complaint that your existing rates are unjust and unreasonable because you're not, moving the money to the EDAM recoverable revenue bucket.
Okay, I can see that. I guess my main concern is somebody gets it, and it's not necessarily small. It may be large, a PTO, and can that PTO unilaterally decide not to reduce its revenue requirement through whatever mechanism possible, either the TRBA or their stated base transmission revenue requirement or their formula rate?
So right now, by us putting that you may, I guess, may include it within, we could redraft this section so I think that it's clear. I think now that I'm reading it, I see an ambiguity. So I would say each PTO that elects, I might work with this, but something like this. Sorry, my computer is a little laggy with the screen share. And then that makes it clear that the may goes to the, you know, the work to get it. But if you're going to work to get that money, you must include it within your the broader transmission revenue requirement.
Okay, I think that takes care of my concern. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. I super appreciate you bringing those up. I think that was a really good conversation. And I guess I'll say, did it spark questions from others? If not, I think, let's see, it's 11 a.m. I propose we take a 5-minute break. It's 2 p.m. for those on the East Coast, so you guys might be feeling a little different. I propose we take a 5-minute break and resume with component 2. Milos, Christina, do you guys have any objection to that?
No objection from me.
Okay. Why don't sorry guys, I want you to take 7 minutes. Why don't we just return at 11:05? I think we don't have too much to go through on component 2 and component 3, and the extra 2 minutes won't kill anyone. So let us resume, and I will talk to you guys at 11:05. Hey everyone, thanks for the break. I know folks are still gathering maybe in the last few seconds here, but I say we just get back to it so they can catch up quickly if they aren't back now. Okay, we're going to go to component 2 just real quick. I'm going to flip over to our framework document just to again orient us on what we're doing. Component 2 here on 332622, which was approved by FERC, is titled New Transmission Capacity.
Before you go into the next section, I see we still have a hand raised by Bonnie Blair. I'm not sure if it is an old hand. Bonnie, did you still have a question? You're now unmuted, Bonnie.
Bonnie, is your hand up from earlier, or do you have a new question?
It might just be an old hand.
Okay,
okay,
Bonnie,
we can go back to you.
Yeah, feel free to chat us or put your hand back up and we'll call on you. Okay, so what's component 2? Component 2, titled New Transmission Capacity, it includes 2 buckets here, as detailed in the framework, a bucket of A and a bucket of B. A bucket are reduced revenues from sales of certain transmission associated with the release of transmission capacity resulting from the expiration of EDAM legacy contracts. And the second category is costs associated with foregone transmission sales on certain network upgrades. So again, our goal is to be consistent with that, but we need to apply it to the CAISO balancing authority. So here we explain that each participating transmission owner may include the appropriate portion of reduced revenues and sales resulting from expiring existing contracts or upgrades as component 2. This is a little, I'm going to go ahead and delete this. This is a little duplicative. And so we can say in the manner further detailed, section 3326.211, I have to make sure I think that's actually 221, but I'll double check that cross-reference, and the subsection set forth below. So first issue is existing contracts. The existing contracts, everybody knows, are defined in the CAISO tariff. Those are the documents. The rights that are granted under those documents are defined in the CAISO tariff as existing rights. I apologize for using 2 terms in the same paragraph. I wasn't intending to convey anything different. I think you could debate about whether contracts or rights could be used in a couple different places, but just to save us all that work, I think we'll just go with existing contracts in all. So that was the only edit we made there to the posted version. For the second component on upgrades, again, part of what we're doing here is we're level setting and making sure everyone's on the same page when they look at section 26. So of course, section 26 is not inclusive, and so we've included cross references to 3326. But we want to call out really what type of upgrades these are. So we hit the high points. These are upgrades that are going to be energized after CAISO begins participating in EDAM, and they increase the transfer capability in the manner described further in the framework. And then they otherwise meet the framework requirements. We didn't relist all those here, but these are more kind of the bells and whistles of what we thought were the larger components to get folks' minds around what's the category we're talking about. But now that we've isolated the category, if there are some upgrades, the PTO is gonna, again, working in conjunction with the CAISO, is gonna calculate its component 2 amounts for upgrades. Upgrades will have not been built, so we'll need a proxy baseline. Because again, we're distributing the money received in a ratio to all PTOs, we have proposed an equally applicable baseline here. So we propose that each PTO that's going to include these upgrades in their component 2 will use the same proxy historical baseline or same component of it. And that's going to be calculated as the ratio of historical WAC revenue for the CAISO BA to total transmission revenue requirements for the CAISO BA. After the new upgrade is included, so we have some actual numbers, there will be a truing up to that estimate consistent with the manner laid out in the baseline, laid out in the framework. So I'm going to pause there to see if there are any questions about component 2. either on the existing contracts piece or the upgrades piece?
I'm not currently seeing any questions or hands raised.
Okay. If you guys have questions, don't hesitate to follow up with us, or component 3 is going to go real fast here. So if the questions hit you, we're happy to take those. Okay, component 3. This, again, is going to be something that CAISO is going to need to calculate, and data will be provided to the PTOs. But as always, this is drafted as in the PTO's control. I'm going to flip over here to the framework tariff section. And unlike the other sections, this framework tariff section actually already talked about the CAISO balancing authority area in a couple places. But the references here in the middle just leave this such that we felt that to keep things cleaner, we were better if we just, brought in the references. So as provided in that subsection, component 3, in the periods where the total volume of EDAM wheeling through transactions exceeds the total net transfers, the CAISO is going to calculate the components 3s, and then we need to do a share. So we'll have calculated the component 3 for the CAISO balancing authority area, and then we'll need to allocate that to the PTOs. So each PTO is going to get a share of the total. Share is going to be based on your individual transmission revenue requirements over the total transmission revenue requirements of the CAISO balancing authority area. And then you take your share and it'll be multiplied by the applicable wheeling access charge rate to get the dollars. And those can be included as component 3. Again, the CAISO will be doing that. We plan to lay out those details in coordination and collaboration in our BPM. But that's component 3. So I'm going to pause and say, does anyone have questions on component 3?
Not currently seeing any hands raised.
Okay, well, if there are no hands raised, with the conclusion of component 1, 2, and 3, we have made our way through how the PTOs in the CAISO balancing authority area could calculate the eligible EDAM recoverable revenue in each case. Now, as we talked about earlier, those are going to be part of the broader transmission revenue requirements of, I see Bonnie's hand now. I see Bonnie's hand.
Yeah,
okay, thanks, Christina. So those will be part of the broader transmission revenue requirements. So in large case, these updates are going to be filed at FERC, and that itself will lead to a good amount of transparency and an opportunity for review and learning. But Bonnie, your hand is up. So where does your question lie? Is it in component 3 or something else?
I think it's broader. So this all sounds incredibly complex. I represent some relatively small PTOs that may or may not have de minimis revenues, but in the situation where there's reason to believe revenues are de minimis, and they say, we don't want to spend weeks trying to figure this out. What happens to the revenues if they say CAISO should keep them, CAISO should just credit them again,
Right. So Bonnie, let me jump in there. Well,
Yeah.
The revenues for the EDAM recoverable revenues aren't created. If the PTO decides, let's just say it's $100. CAISO runs the numbers. We give you our printout. It says right now component 1, 2, 3, $100. And I can see a PTO saying, wow, this is a lot of administrative work for $100. So they would not amend anything, would not file anything, and that $100 would not go in the EDAM recoverable revenue bucket for the CAISO balancing authority. Now, what would that PTO experience? Well,
No, first of all, what would the CAISO experience? In other words, the CAISO has collected the $100 from other BAAs, right?
No. It won't collect it unless you, the PTO, have included it in your EDAM recoverable revenue. That's the first step. Then once the CAISO has, I'm simplifying obviously, a list of the EDAM recoverable revenue for the PTOs, it's going to aggregate those, and that aggregate amount will be billed out to others as the EDAM access charge. So PTO takes action first, CAISO takes action second, other entities receive the bill third. They are then going to pay their bill, and those dollars are going to be distributed proportionally back to the PTOs that have EDAM recoverable revenue requirements. So in your situation, Bonnie, oh, hold on, James, and then you can correct me. But I think in your situation, Bonnie, if you didn't file, you don't want it, I don't think you also get a share. But James, jump in and correct me where I got it wrong.
No, you didn't get it wrong. It was just a little nuance. That's what it's the, we are going to have a form for each PTO to officially send to the ISO as to what is your recoverable revenue. And this is what Heather's getting into. If you determine it's $100 and you don't want to recover it, you would not send that form in, or you'd send the form in with zero, which then means I'm not going to recover that for you. It is now going to be considered within your normal TRR, and it'll go into the recoverable of the TAC rate. So
wait, stop. If it's not recoverable, how does it? What is there to flow into the TRR?
I think James meant the impact will be flown through your TRR. Presumably before you got, let's just say, $1,000 of exports at that spot, and you were getting WAC revenue. Now you're not going to get it. So your transmission revenue requirement will presumably pick up that you're not getting that money anymore from that source, and you're not getting it from a different source. Is that what you meant, James?
Yeah, when we're doing our calculation of the WAC rate and the TAC rate, we take the TRRs minus the TRBAA. And this EDAM access recoverable is part of that TRBAA, in essence, amount. If you say $100 is not worth recovering, you in essence aren't reducing your TRR by that $100. And therefore, it just rolls into the normal, that's what I meant, it rolls into the TAC rate.
Right, so the TAC rate is $100 more than it otherwise would have been if you had gone to the trouble to collect the revenues.
Right. In our simple, there's a bunch of nuances here we all skipped over, but in our simple example, your TAC rate's $100 higher. And then the risk is that someone would file a 206 complaint and say, well, that TAC rate is unjust and unreasonable. It's $100 too high. You need to go get those $100 from the EDAM recoverable revenue bucket. And so it's a risk decision for each PTO. But I think there's, in our $100 example, that does seem to be an easy one. But Bonnie, do you have more questions on that? Do you want to pause? I see Chris Jones has his hand up as well.
I think I have to just do a lot of thinking about whether there might be an easier way to deal with this. Yeah.
We're open. I agree. It's multi-levels and complicated. So Chris, I think we'll open your line. Bonnie, don't hesitate to come back to us. But Chris, hopefully you're unmuted and we should be able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now.
Okay, great. Hey, just a process question. You mentioned it twice, and I want to make sure I'm caught what you meant. You said that the EDAM recoverable revenue of the TRR of the relevant PTOs will be filed at FERC. And I want to make sure, I'm not sure that's what you meant to say, or did you? In other words, there's not going to be a filing that says, here's my EDAM recoverable revenue before it gets allocated out.
I think it was a mix. It depends, everyone's got a different rate. So it depends on how folks are going to incorporate this EDAM recoverable revenue line item, which is essentially what this is. Maybe it's a few line items, but we'll call it a line item. So there are different ways. I think some folks will have updates various formula rate updates filed at FERC that would include this information in it. Others may not. Others may choose to implement it in a different way, and some folks aren't FERC jurisdictional. So I don't want to give a totally all-encompassing, answer here, but in general, if folks must include this as a component of their transmission revenue requirement, there is an auditable trail outside of the CAISO's process for review of those.
Okay, well, I just want to be clear about this. So I think you're talking about the back end, right? So when a PTO receives access charge revenue, it may act as a revenue credit that it would have to show in its formula rate update. But to the extent on the front end that the charge is outbound from the ISO to EDAM entities, there's not going to be a FERC filing about that process.
So let's see, CAISO as market operator has authority to issue the charge. So that's taken care of. Now your question is, will the CAISO, I think I'm restating it in a question, will the CAISO include the EDAM recoverable revenue of a PTO within the EDAM access charge the CAISO as market operator issues? And I would say, if that PTO needs to amend its filing at FERC, let's say for whatever reason, it has to add new line items that require an actual amendment, yeah, the CAISO would require those be made before, maybe those line items don't have dollars in them yet, but we would need that structure in place before we would include the dollars. But yes, the dollars would not be filed at FERC on the front end, though through various annual updates and true-ups in the following years, those dollars would be auditable because, again, they would likely be within the TRRBA.
Yeah, I think we're talking past each other. That's fine. The point is, when the EDAM entities pay the access charge, that happens by virtue of the CAISO tariff, by operation of the CAISO tariff. What happens on the back end when the ISO flows that money back to PTOs is going to require at some point perhaps tweaks to various formula rates within the ISO. I get that. But I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear for everybody listening. There's not going to be a FERC filing for every time a PTO submits to the ISO its access charge revenue to be recovered from those of us on the outside.
I'm going to say yes,
right.
And I'm going to unpack. Okay, so again, everything we're talking about here for the PTOs is EDAM recoverable revenue requirement. What the CAISO as market operator issues is an EDAM access charge. Let's say, again, in my earlier example of Portland General and LADWP, the CAISO as market operator is going to calculate the EDAM access charge to those folks. How much they're charged, so how much that is, depends on how much EDAM recoverable revenue there is of each PTO. So, Chris, I was intending to say that there is a first step some PTOs may need to go through to even allow the CAISO to include those dollars in the EDAM access charge that is issued to others. For example, if, I'm sorry to pick on you, PG&E. If PG&E didn't file their, or didn't do anything for their EDAM recoverable revenue in year one, PG&E's dollars would not end up in the EDAM access charge.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So sorry for going on and on about that. But yes, your question was clear, and the easy answer is yes. Okay. So with that, and Chris, your hand is still up, so I don't know if you had more.
Nope. Okay.
Okay. So we've covered again how the EDAM recoverable revenue, the dollars associated with the PTOs that make up the EDAM access charge issued out to others. Now, I think what we were really just talking about is distributing those charges that the CAISO receives. So you know, in my example, Portland General has some EDAM recoverable revenue. LADWP has EDAM recoverable revenue. The CAISO Balancing Authority area receives a bill to recover the EDAM recoverable revenues of those balancing authorities. That's here what section 2623 is about, is when CAISO receives a bill for the EDAM access charge. And this is provided in the framework and the CAISO, but we're just putting it here again to keep everything in one place and make it clear. We're going to distribute those charges to gross load, consistent with 33.26.3. In the posted version, I can't remember, we had another sentence here about a credit. We realized that was really inapplicable, so I don't know if folks still see that on their screen. I might have deleted it without track changes, and I apologize. But this is all that's needed here. And then the only other just real quick change is when we filed the framework, we included this commitment to make changes to section 26. We're obviously carrying through on that commitment. So as part of that, we just want to clean up this language because, well, we're doing as directed. So Bert, I see your hand popped up. Do you want to talk about EDAM recoverable revenue? Do you want to talk about distributing EDAM access charges, or just this admin deletion to 33.26? And let's make sure we unmute Bert's line. Okay, Bert, how's it going?
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Hello.
Now?
Success.
All right. My question had to do with, I think it's 2623, the distribution to gross load of the EDAM access charges. Now, to gross load, is that to gross load and billed to the scheduling coordinator that is representing the power procurement function, or the scheduling coordinator that represents the TTO function?
Ooh, that's now that I need to phone a friend on, Bert. I thought I knew where you were going, but that is a new question. James, Lynn, or Milos, do either of you know the answer to that?
It's not the PTO, it's the gross load of the scheduling coordinator that is participating in the market. So,
okay, that's the way I thought it should be.
Yeah.
And Bert, that's kind of why that old credit language I had here was a little irrelevant. So sorry, that's why I deleted it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so everyone, last call for questions. Poke your team members. Of course, we're always available after, but otherwise, we want to clean this up. As you know, I need to get correct. Are we associated with? Are we attributed to? I need to double check all our section references. Our plan here was to solicit any additional comments and any red lines folks had, and incorporate them into this version here. Post a new version that would include these kind of admin red lines you see on the screen, as well as any other incremental red lines we need to incorporate. We would post that version. If this version that we post mostly looks like this version we just discussed, I don't know if we need another call. But if the version that we post is going to look substantially different, I think we are open to having another call if folks wish to discuss. So I'm mostly going to leave that in Milos's capable hands, and folks should communicate either with me or Milos about their preferences for how to handle that. But Milos, I don't see any other hands up, so I think we're through our tariff language, and I propose I stop sharing and turn the mic over to you.
Oh, thank you, Heather, and thanks again to everybody that stuck around, and appreciate the questions. As Heather noted, by all means, feel free to reach out to us with any questions offline, any comments, suggestions. On the next step slide that Christina is going to walk through, she'll lay out some of our plans for some of the more immediate next steps, including a comment deadline. But certainly, we're here available as a resource. If something is unclear with the language as you're reviewing it prior to submission of comments, or have some other questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to Heather, myself, or customer service. We'll be happy to provide any clarifications. And with that, I'll turn it over maybe to you, Christina, to walk us through the next steps and close this out. Thank you.
you, Milosh. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next step. And before I move on to next steps, I'm just checking to see if there's any hands raised for any final questions. I'm not seeing any, so we'll go ahead to the next steps. So we're targeting November 2024 for filing the extended day-ahead market access charge for the ISO BAA design with FERC. And please be sure to submit comments on the draft tariff language by October 21st on our initiative landing page. So you can go to our initiative landing page, and then it's the extended day-ahead market ISO Balancing Authority Area Participation Rules Initiative page. It's this link here at the bottom. And if you run into any issues, you can always email us for assistance. Next, I'll go into some announcements. For insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see the latest blog posts. Next, we'd like to remind you of the policy initiatives timeline. The ISO launched this timeline to give stakeholders an overview of ongoing policy initiatives, and it offers details such as initiative status, timelines, and the current phase of the stakeholder engagement process. Updates are made weekly and can be found on the policy initiatives landing page. For more info, you can always email us at ISO Stakeholder Affairs. We'd also like to remind you to register for the 2024 Stakeholder Symposium, which will be taking place later this month. You can visit the event website linked here for additional information. And lastly, the ISO would like all UAAs to actively begin replacing your user and business certificates to Entrust certificates. The due date is at the end of this month. You can email uaarequests@kaiso.com, or you can always create a city ticket if you have any questions. And with that, we'd like to thank you for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage. Thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
This event has concluded. You may now disconnect.